All right, let's dive into something really chilling today. We're heading over to Spain to explore a case that's considered one of their most infamous mysteries, El Expediente Vallecas.
Ooh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
It's got the classic elements of a good ghost story,
Like what?
A Ouija board, a mysterious death, and a family terrorized by, well, what they claim was paranormal activity. But what sets this one apart, at least from what I've read?
Well, for me, it's the fact that it's not just like rumors or legends. This case actually got the police involved.
You're kidding.
Nope, we're talking official reports filed by officers who investigated the strange events that happened.
Wow, you don't hear about police documenting paranormal activity every day.
Mm.
That's what got me hooked, too, I gotta say. So let's go back to the beginning. What exactly happened in that Vallecas apartment back in '91?
So, it all centers around the Gutierrez Lazaro family and the tragic death of their daughter, Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro.
How old was she?
Only 18 when she passed, and the details surrounding her death are, well, they're incredibly mysterious.
Okay, so let's start with Estefania. Who was she? What was her life like before all of this happened?
From what I've gathered, she seems to have been a pretty normal teenager living in Madrid. But some sources mention she had an interest in the occult, the paranormal, that sort of thing.
That's interesting.
And that might explain why she participated in a Ouija board session with some friends from school.
Ah, there it is, the Ouija board.
Yep. And this session is considered a key event leading up to her death.
A key event? You mean like something happened during the session?
Well, shortly after, Estefania started having seizures, hallucinations, things like that. The doctors were stumped. They couldn't figure out what was causing it.
And then she passed away.
Yeah, not long after. The autopsy report listed the cause of death as sudden and suspicious. They basically admitted they didn't know what killed her.
That's unsettling, to say the least. An unexplained death, a Ouija board, hints of the paranormal. You can see how this story starts to get creepy fast. So, what happened after Estefania's death?
Well, that's when things take a seriously dark turn. The family started experiencing all sorts of bizarre and terrifying phenomena in their apartment.
Like what? Give me the spooky details.
We're talking disembodied voices, objects moving on their own, like straight out of a horror film. They even described this strange brown slime appearing out of nowhere.
Brown slime. Okay, that's definitely creepy. It's like their grief was mixed with something much darker.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just sounds and slime either. They said doors would slam shut on their own, the temperature would suddenly drop. They even felt like something unseen was touching them.
Imagine the terror, feeling like your own home had turned against you.
Exactly. It got so bad that they felt completely helpless. That's what drove them to call the police.
Wow. Reaching out to the authorities, I mean, that's a pretty unusual step when you're dealing with something like this.
For sure. So on November 27, 1992, almost a year after Estefania died, the family made a frantic call to the police. That's what led to the police report that's become such a crucial part of this whole case.
This is the report that actually documents the paranormal activity, right? What did the police find when they got to the apartment?
Well, the report was filed by Inspector Jose Negri and his team, and it describes their first-hand experiences inside the apartment.
So they saw something too.
Oh, yeah. They heard unexplained noises coming from the balcony. They even saw a locked cupboard door suddenly fly open, like something unseen had forced it open.
The police actually witnessed this themselves.
Yeah, it wasn't just the family's word. And get this, the report even mentions something truly chilling.
What's that?
A crucifix ripped right off the wall.
Wait, are we talking like an exorcism movie here?
It gets weirder. They found the crucifix on the floor, and there were these clear claw marks etched into the wall right where it used to hang. And if that's not enough, they also felt this sudden extreme temperature drop in the bathroom.
Hold on, a lot of strange stuff was happening in that apartment. You said multiple officers experienced this.
Yeah, and that's why this report is so hard to just brush aside. It's not just one person's account. Several officers backed each other up about these weird events. So we're not talking about some overactive imagination here or a family trying to get attention. These were trained professionals and they couldn't explain what they were experiencing.
So it sounds like El Expediente Vallecas had some pretty solid evidence backing it up. I'm guessing everyone believed the story after that police report came out.
Well, not exactly. You might be surprised to hear that some people still question the events of El Expediente Vallecas, even with that police report and all the creepy details.
Really? Who are these skeptics and what's their take on all of this?
Well, believe it or not, some of Estefania's own siblings have spoken out, and they have downplayed or even completely denied the paranormal events that their family and the police described.
Whoa. a family divided. That's a twist. So why don't they believe it?
They claim some of the events were exaggerated or just plain misinterpreted. They offer other explanations, like maybe grief and stress influenced how the family saw things.
So, are they saying the family was imagining things because they were grieving?
Not necessarily imagining things, but maybe their emotional state made them see things differently.
Okay, I see what you mean. Grief can be really powerful, and it can mess with your head. But what about the police officers? They weren't grieving Estefania, and they weren't looking for signs from her. They were there to do their job.
That's true, and the skeptics have tried to address that too. They suggest that even police officers can be influenced by the power of suggestion. Like, if they went into that apartment already expecting something paranormal, maybe they were more likely to misinterpret things.
Okay, I can see that, but that police report is pretty detailed. The cupboard door, the crucifix, those things seem pretty hard to explain away as just misunderstandings.
That's the thing, you've got this back and forth between the seemingly inexplicable and the possibility of psychological influence. That's what makes El Expediente Vallecas so fascinating, so difficult to pin down.
Yeah, it's like solving a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing. You can kind of see the picture, but you can't be sure what it really is.
And then you've got another layer at the media. They love a good ghost story, right? They often sensationalize these things, which just makes it harder to separate fact from fiction.
So you're saying the media might have shaped the story of El Expediente Vallecas and maybe even influenced the family's memories of what happened?
It's definitely possible. Once a story like this gets going in the media, it can take on a life of its own. Details can get blown out of proportion, timelines can get mixed up, and it becomes hard to know what really happened versus what's been, embellished or just plain made up.
It's like that game of telephone, where the message changes with each retelling.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much of what we know about El Expediente Vallecas is real and how much is hype.
Right. And even with the best intentions, memory can be tricky. It's not a perfect recording. Our emotions, our beliefs, even things we hear after an event can change our memories.
So how do you sift through all that and figure out what really happened? Is there any way to know for sure?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. But one thing we haven't talked about yet is one of the most unsettling parts of this whole case. The voices.
You mean the disembodied voices the family said they heard?
Yep. They described hearing Estefania's voice calling out to them, along with other voices they didn't recognize. Whispering sometimes, screaming other times. Auditory phenomena like that are common in supposed hauntings, and they can be super disturbing.
It's like straight out of nightmare fuel, hearing voices that seem to come from nowhere. Are there any theories about what causes these voices?
Some people believe they're the voices of the dead trying to communicate. Maybe Estefania was reaching out to her family from beyond the grave.
But a ghostly phone call. That's kind of creepy, but also a little sad.
There's another theory that these voices could be coming from the subconscious mind. Like, when you're under extreme stress or trauma, your mind can play tricks on you. These auditory hallucinations might be a way of dealing with all those intense emotions.
So you're saying the family's own fears and anxieties could be taking the form of voices?
Possibly. But then, how do you explain the fact that the police officers heard noises too? Were they all having some kind of group hallucination?
That's what I keep coming back to. It seems unlikely that everyone involved is just imagining things.
Yeah, it's tough to dismiss. While it's possible the officers were influenced by the family or mistook ordinary sounds in a dark, unfamiliar place, the fact that several of them had similar experiences just makes things even more complicated.
No kidding. Whatever the explanation, there's no denying how unsettling those voices must have been.
Oh, for sure. It taps into that primal fear of the unknown, something unseen lurking in the shadows.
Imagine that, your own home, your safe space, invaded by these mysterious voices. Makes you wonder about consciousness, about what we can perceive, about the boundaries of reality itself.
And that's the allure of cases like El Expediente Vallecas, right? They make us question what we know. They force us to accept that there might be things in this world we just can't fully grasp.
It's scary, but it's also kind of thrilling, isn't it? This whole deep dive has been a whirlwind of spooky details, conflicting accounts, and just mind-blowing possibilities. Before we wrap up this part, though, we haven't talked about what happened to the family after all this.
Ah, good point. What became of the Gutierrez Lazaro family after those terrifying events? Did they find any peace? Did the activity ever stop?
Those are great questions, and questions we'll explore as we continue our deep dive into El Expediente Vallecas.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like you've got all this evidence pointing towards something truly paranormal, but then you have these people, even family members, who are skeptical.
It's a real head-scratcher. On one hand, you have the unexplained events, the creepy details, and on the other hand, you have people questioning the whole thing. So where do you even begin to untangle something like this? Are there any explanations for these events that don't involve, ghosts and spirits?
Well, some skeptics believe that the family's grief over Estefania's death could have played a big role in how they interpreted things. They argue that when you're going through intense emotional distress, you might be more susceptible to suggestion. So basically, they might have been misinterpreting ordinary events as something more sinister.
So they're saying the family was essentially imagining things because they were grieving.
Not necessarily imagining things, but maybe their grief clouded their judgment. For example, they might have been hearing noises that were always there, but they were just more aware of them because of their grief.
That makes sense. Grief can definitely distort your perception. But what about the police officers? They weren't grieving Estefania, and they weren't looking for signs from her. They were trained professionals responding to a call.
That's a good point, and it's something the skeptics have addressed. They suggest that even police officers can be influenced by suggestion. If they went into the apartment already believing that something paranormal was happening, they might have been more likely to misinterpret things or even see things that weren't really there.
I can see how that's possible. But the police report describes some pretty specific things, like the locked cupboard door flying open, the crucifix ripped off the wall. It's hard to imagine those being just misinterpretations.
You're right, those details are pretty compelling. And that's what makes this whole case so intriguing. You have these seemingly inexplicable events, but you also have the potential for psychological factors at play.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing. You can see the general shape, but you can't quite figure out the whole picture.
Exactly. And that brings us to another aspect of this case that we haven't really touched on yet, the media's role in shaping the narrative. The media, as we know, loves a good ghost story. They often sensationalize these types of events, which can further blur the lines between fact and fiction.
So you're saying that the media's portrayal of El Expediente Vallecas might have actually influenced public perception and maybe even the family's own memories of what happened?
It's definitely a possibility. Once a story like this gets picked up by the media, it can take on a life of its own. Details can get exaggerated, timelines can get distorted, and it can become really difficult to separate what actually happened from what's been embellished or even completely fabricated.
Like that game of telephone, right? The message gets changed a little bit with each retelling. Makes you wonder how much of what we know about El Expediente Vallecas is based on real events versus media hype.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that memory is a fickle thing, even when people have the best intentions. It's not a perfect recording of events. Our memories can be influenced by our emotions, our beliefs, and even the information we're exposed to after an event has happened.
So with all these conflicting accounts and potential influences, how can we ever know for sure what really happened in that apartment?
That's the big question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. But there's one more element of this case that we haven't discussed yet, and it's one of the most chilling aspects of the voices.
You're talking about the disembodied voices that the family reported hearing, the ones that seemed to be coming from Estefania.
Yes, exactly. They described hearing her voice calling out to them, along with other unidentified voices. Sometimes they were whispering, sometimes screaming. This type of auditory phenomenon is often recorded in cases of alleged hauntings and can be incredibly disturbing.
It sounds terrifying, hearing voices that seem to come from nowhere. What are some of the theories about what might cause these voices?
Well, some people believe they are literally the voices of the deceased, attempting to communicate from beyond the grave. In this case, it could be Estefania trying to reach out to her family.
Like a ghostly phone call. It's both eerie and heartbreaking at the same time.
There's also the theory that these voices could be a manifestation of the subconscious mind, especially in cases of extreme stress or trauma. The mind can play tricks on us, and these auditory hallucinations might be a way of processing those intense emotions.
So the family's own fears and anxieties could be taking on an auditory form.
Precisely. But then that raises the question of why the police officers reported hearing noises as well. Were they all experiencing a collective hallucination?
It's hard to believe that everyone involved was simply imagining things, especially the police officers who were trained to be observant and objective.
I agree. While it's possible that the officers were influenced by the family's accounts, or that they misidentified ordinary sounds in a dark and unfamiliar environment, the fact that multiple officers reported similar experiences adds another layer of complexity to the case.
It definitely does. Regardless of the explanation, there's no denying the power of these reported voices to create a sense of fear and unease. It's like something out of a nightmare.
It really is. It taps into our primal fears of the unknown, of something unseen and unheard lurking in the shadows.
It's like the ultimate invasion of privacy, having your own home, your supposed safe space, infiltrated by these mysterious voices. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about reality.
And that's what's so fascinating about cases like El Expediente Vallecas. They force us to confront the limits of our knowledge and to acknowledge that there are things in this world that we may never fully understand.
It's both terrifying and exhilarating, isn't it? This whole case has been a whirlwind of spooky details, conflicting perspectives, and mind-boggling possibilities. But before we move on, we haven't talked about what happened to the family after all of this.
Right. What became of the Gutierrez Lazaro family after those terrifying events? Did they ever find peace? Did the paranormal activity cease?
These are all great questions, and ones we'll explore as we continue our deep dive into El Expediente Vallecas. So we've dug deep into the events, the police report, even explored different explanations for what might have happened. But what about after all that? What happened to the family? Did they ever find some peace?
Well, after months of dealing with this supposed paranormal activity, the Gutierrez Lazaro family decided to move out of that apartment on Luis Marin Street.
I can't say I blame them. Who wouldn't want to get away from such a traumatic place, you know? Even if you're a skeptic, the fear and stress they went through would make anyone want a fresh start. But did moving actually help? Did the paranormal activity follow them?
That's a tough one. I haven't found anything concrete in the sources about whether it continued or not, but I think it's important to remember that just because you move, it doesn't mean the trauma disappears. Those psychological and emotional scars can stick with you no matter where you go.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this wasn't just about a haunted house. This is about a family dealing with an unimaginable loss, the fear of the unknown, their lives turned upside down. It's a human story at its core.
Absolutely. And while the family might have tried to move on, the story of El Expediente Vallecas took on a life of its own. Over the years, different family members have come forward with their own versions of events, sometimes contradicting each other. That just added more fuel to the fire, so to speak.
Right, we talk about how some of Estefania's siblings disputed the whole paranormal angle. Did those differing viewpoints ever get resolved?
Not that I've seen. It seems the family is still divided. Some believe what happened was genuinely paranormal, while others hold on to more rational explanations. And with all the media attention over the years, especially with that movie Veronica coming out, well, it's all kept the story in the public eye, with all its different sides.
So instead of fading away, it's become even more complex over time. It's wild how a case like this can still capture people's imaginations, even decades later.
It really is. It speaks to that human need to understand the unknown, you know? Our desire to make sense of things that don't have easy answers. El Expediente Vallecas pushes us to the edge of what we know, to consider the possibility that some things are beyond our grasp.
After all this, all the different angles and evidence and what-ifs, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from El Expediente Vallecas?
I think the most interesting thing about it is that there is no easy answer, no neat conclusion. It's a story that makes you think critically, to question your assumptions, to accept the mystery. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that stay unsolved.
Well said. This has been a fascinating journey exploring this chilling Spanish mystery. We've looked at the evidence, the different perspectives, delved into the psychology of belief, the power of suggestion. And while we may never know for sure what really happened in that Vallecas apartment, El Expediente Vallecas reminds us that the world is full of strange and unexplained things, things that challenge how we see reality. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and maybe keep the lights on a little longer tonight.